Welcome to Forgotten Comic Book Heroes, the first in a series of videos in which we'll take a look at comic book characters who had their moment in the sun and then faded away into cultural obscurity. Many of these characters, though, were centerpieces for excellent graphic storytelling, showcasing a synergy of good writing and good art, and they're well worth revisiting. The Adventures of Ben Bowie and His Mountain Men were published by Dell Comics from 1952 to 1958, initially as reoccurring characters in an anthology book titled Four Color, and then later in their own book. The title character, Ben Bowie, was a trapper and frontiersman in the American colonies during the mid-18th century. The supporting characters included Jim Prentice, a boy that Ben had adopted after Jim's parents were killed, Zeke Moss, an older, more experienced mountain man, and Zeke's friend Naka, a Native American from the Iroquois nations. Now, the character of Naka is an indication that the Ben Bowie stories were well researched and historically accurate. The Iroquois was a confederation of tribes that lived in what would one day be the northeastern United States. At the time during which the Ben Bowie stories are set, the Iroquois were allied with the British, so it made perfect sense for Naka to be a friend and partner to men who would have been British subjects at the time. The French, who were Britain's arch enemy in the 18th century, allied with the Hurons and the Algonquins, tribes that were traditional enemies of the Iroquois. Thus, Ben and his crew would often come into conflict with those tribes. Like many westerns from that time, the Ben Bowie comics often used Native Americans as default bad guys, but it was also clear that the writers researched the tribes involved and recognized that there was both good and evil in every culture. Ben's first appearance was in Four Color number 443, cover dated January 1953, but actually published in late 1952. There were 3 stories in this issue, structured to both tell exciting adventure tales and also clearly establish the personalities of the various characters. The first story involved Ben and Jim attempting to rescue a man kidnapped by the Hurons. Along the way, they meet Zeke and Naka, teaming up with them for the first time. The story is structured to give each of the 4 friends moments to shine and does an excellent job of establishing the group dynamic. Ben is the leader. Jim is brave and intelligent but still learning. Zeke is experienced and wiser than he initially seems. And Naka is likely to act on his own initiative but still look out for his friends. The 2 backup stories in the issue further establish the character relationships by giving Ben and Jim their own adventure and then doing the same for Zeke and Naka. Between 1953 and 1955, Ben and his crew appeared in 5 more issues of Four Color. Stories involved the sort of tasks frontiersmen did in actual history. Aside from trapping beaver, the friends would escort wagon trains, they would clash with hostile tribes, and they would deal with attempts by the French to monopolize the fur trade. Now, throughout its run, both in Four Color and later in its own book, the writers and artists behind Ben Bowie and His Mountain Men were usually uncredited, and there's often no definite record of who they were. Only a few artists have been definitely identified. These are William Overgaard, John Small, and Frank Thorne. But both writing and art were always strong, with clear figure work and effective compositions that highlighted well-written stories. Ben got his own book in 1956, which was published quarterly. Because of the 6 appearances in Four Color, this issue was Ben Bowie number 7, cover dated May to July 1956. Beginning in this issue, Ben and his crew began a story arc that ran through issue number 11. Crossing the Mississippi, they traveled to the far west and set up a trading post and a rendezvous point for other trappers. This included some of the best stories in the series, involving conflicts with the Spanish, harsh winter weather, and the continuing efforts to befriend and trade with local tribes, which led to one memorable story in which Ben had to participate in a whale hunt. Now, each issue of Ben Bowie had 2 stories involving the main characters, each of those stories running from 14 to 18 pages each, plus a 4-page backup story about a character named Yellowhair, a white boy adopted by the Sioux after his parents were killed. These short but very effective tales involved Yellowhair learning the skills necessary to be a Sioux hunter and warrior, while also dealing with prejudice from those who didn't think he belonged in the tribe. Once again, both the writer and the artist are uncredited. In Ben Bowie number 12, Naka is summoned home when the Iroquois begin fighting the Hurons. Unwilling to break up the team, the others also head back east, returning the action of the book to the British colonies and getting the characters involved in the French and Indian War. The comic did not become exclusively a war-themed book, though. Ben and his crew still had to make a living, so we often find them trapping and exploring. They also continued to establish trade relations with various native tribes. One story had Ben hired to escort a snooty British aristocrat into the wilderness, while another brought him into conflict with the dishonest owner of a trading post. Now, the last issue was Ben Bowie number 17, cover dated November 1958 to January 1959. The final two stories had the mountain men delivering cannon to a British fort in dealing with a half-crazed hermit. Both stories are very good, but sadly neither gives the characters any closure, though to be fair, it's very possible the unidentified writers and artists did not know that this would be the last stories they would write for this character. Perhaps by chance, the Yellow Hair backup story does give a sense of closure, as Yellow Hair declines to live with a white family he had befriended and decides he is now and forever a Sioux. Now, most issues of Ben Bowie have fallen into the public domain, and so can be found and read online. They are excellent stories, told by skilled writers and artists, giving the world of fiction a character who deserves to be better remembered.